Did you want President Trump to win the election, and did you direct any of your officials to help him do that?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Because he talked about bringing the U.S.-Russia relationship back to normal.
So we know who Russia favored in 2016, and now a new analysis of Russian-backed news coverage is shedding light on which candidates the Kremlin may be focused on heading into 2020. You may come across their stories when changing the channel or surfing the internet. But it's important to remember when you see those RT or Sputnik News logos, you are getting information from Russian state-sponsored news outlets. The Foreign Policy Research Institute has analyzed over 1,700 news articles this year from RT and Sputnik News. It found the following. Joe Biden was mentioned more than 300 times and led the way in terms of negative coverage with a 53% rating. On the flip side, the analysis found that Hawaii Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was the overwhelming favorite, with 61 mentions and 46% favorable coverage. Our next guest, Clint Watts, worked on the analysis, and he writes this, quote, "For Russia thus far, Biden is to 2020 what Hillary Clinton was to 2016. Here for his exclusive report, the aforementioned Clint Watts, former FBI special agent, a distinguished research fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, author of Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. Clint, thank you for rolling this out here tonight. Thanks for coming on. Why focus on these news outlets and not the traditional Twitter addresses, the bots and the trolls that drove so much of it in 2016?
If you look back 4 years ago compared to now, Russia led the way in disinformation and use of social media. We know a lot about this from the Mueller report. Fast forward to now, there is so much disinformation out on social media platforms. It's very difficult to parse out what would be Russia, Iran, or China, two other countries we'll look at in this project, or any domestic influence activity. And so what's remarkable, when you look at this, going even back to the last election, and as you put very appropriately in the opening here, Vladimir Putin doesn't hide who they like or who they don't like. If you read what the Russian news outlets are putting out, what their take is on the different candidates, they'll actually signal, they'll point such that you can then go look in social media and you can try and find where that inauthentic activity is, where those bots might be pushing, where that fake or manipulated news might be leading someone in a direction that isn't quite the truth.
Because we're all news consumers, I always ask you when you come on for a consumer guide, what does this messaging look like? What do these stories look like? What's the tone? What do they say about Biden that's so good, or so bad, and Gabbard that's so good, for example?
Well, there's two kinds of bias you can inject. It doesn't matter what kind of news outlet you are. One, you can just overtly state bias inside the articles, right? You can take a very positive slant or a negative slant. Or it's selection bias, which is you just select stories, an outlet can select stories, which then leads to a framing of a candidate as being positive or negative. What Russia does that's quite fascinating is they are much like any U.S. news outlet that's out there, but they're very good at pushing the corners. When you look at those charts, I always look at about 70% of mentions will be neutral, and that would be very consistent with any U.S. news outlet that you might see. But where I always look are the fringes. When you go towards the negative or towards the positive, and you see that middle number of neutral move in one direction or another, that's where that very slight push left or right, positive or negative, is going for those candidates. And so with Biden, it's fascinating. Not only does he show up the most, overwhelming compared to the rest of the field, probably a lot more percentage-wise than what you'd see in the United States. It focuses generally on a couple of issues. One, his age and his health, very similar to what we saw with Hillary Clinton's health back 4 years ago. And then the other part is Ukraine, Hunter Biden. That sort of conspiracy is already there, and it echoes a lot of what the president is talking about in the United States. This time around, Russia doesn't need to make fake news or manipulated truths. America's doing plenty of that for them, and you see them mostly recycling, repurposing specific narratives, in this case out of the president, and then pushing it against Biden himself.
How do they talk up Tulsi Gabbard?
They just speak to what her issues are, but what they're doing is they're actually pushing her and pushing her content, talking about her more than you would see typically in the U.S. audience space. For Russia, what she says is perfect for what they want Americans to hear. She is pushing against the established Democratic Party. She's an Army officer with a combat record. She's been over to Iraq. She is saying that the U.S. should withdraw from foreign battlefields. I think she alluded last debate that President Trump was backing al-Qaeda in Syria, which is pretty crazy statement to make. So all of these things, her position on Syria, visiting Assad, these are things that Russia wants and supports. So it's natural for them to amplify her positions.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.